You were never meant to hear this. Not from me, not from anyone. Because the moment you know it, something begins watching you back. And if you keep listening past this point, you'll never be the same. In the year 1842, when the wind dragged its knuckles across the black fields of Dogwood Parish, there stood a house where no road ran and no map dared to mark. Tall, narrow, leaning to the left as though it had spent its whole life listening for something beneath the earth. The locals called it the Carroway House, though no one remembered why. Inside lived 3 sisters. Ununice, Ha, Mebeth. Always together, always cloaked in mourning black. You never heard their footsteps, only the sound of the wind shifting when they passed. They didn't ride horses. They didn't arrive in wagons. They walked, barefoot, carrying baskets of herbs and tallow-soaked rags. And when a child was coming into this world, or a mother was slipping out of it, no one called the town doctor. They called the sisters. They never knocked. They simply appeared, and they never left until it was over. Some swore they whispered in a language older than the hills, others said they never spoke at all. But there was one fact that no one could deny. When the Carroways came, death followed, not the sudden kind, not the screaming kind, but the slow, still, solemn kind. Before I take you further down this road, and trust me, the road is darker than you think, I want to know something. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Put it in the comments right now, because the hour matters more than you realize. The first written proof of their presence wasn't in a census or church registry. It was in a burial ledger found in a rusted tin at the base of a whitewashed cross. No surnames, just first names and causes of death. Eliza, ruptured womb. Charity, breech birth. Ruth, bled dry. Beside each entry, 3 initials, E, H, C, M, C. Over time, people began to notice a pattern. Where the Carroways went, life and death danced closer than they should. Still, people begged for their help, because, no matter the cost, the babies came back breathing. Most of them. That winter, Jonah Bray's son was born under their care. The boy never cried, never blinked, never moved his lips to feed. When Jonah brought him to the church for christening, the font was bone dry and the altar was covered in dead flies. By spring, whispers took root in the market square, mothers trading stories with trembling hands, babies who wouldn't sleep unless cradled in salt, children who wept blood at dusk until the sisters returned and placed strange things under their pillows. Reeds, stones, feathers bound in hair. The preacher's wife once saw Ha Carroway burying something wrapped in twine beneath her elder tree. When she asked what it was, Ha only said, "It will keep the spirits from gnawing." No one knew if she meant the dead or the living. Within a week, the preacher's wife was gone, and she left behind only one warning. Her newborn had no shadow. By the summer of 1843, the Carroway name was spoken only in whispers, and never after dark. The church bell had gone silent, not from rust, not from storm, but because the rope had been sliced clean through as if by a single deliberate hand. The sisters never stepped inside the chapel, never crossed themselves, never recited verse, and yet when sickness swept through the township, when ash fever claimed 12 lives in 1 week, Ununice Carroway was first at every door. She carried bowls of boiled bark, placing them beneath cribs. She sat beside the sick, murmuring words no one understood, as though bargaining with something invisible. Those who survived told the same story, the sound of hooves echoing in their fevers and a cool hand pressing against their chest, holding something inside them down. The doctor called it delirium. The priest called it blasphemy, the Carroways called it necessary. The veil weakens when the body burns, Ununice once said, and some things must not slip through. One night in early August, a boy named Levi Donald was dared by his older brother to knock on the Carroway door. He never even reached it. Hours later, he stumbled back barefoot, shirt soaked, one eye turned inward. He wouldn't speak, not to his mother, not to the doctor, until the preacher pressed a hand to his forehead. Then Levi whispered a single word, wailing. By morning, his hair was pure white. When they checked the ridge for footprints, they found none. Only a line of tiny handprints pressed deep into the earth, far too small for any of the sisters, but heavy, as if whatever made them had sunk into the soil and waited. That autumn, the air in Dogwood Parish thickened into something that tasted of smoke and rot. Livestock miscarried in pairs. Crows circled for days without leaving, and still the Carroways worked. A stillbirth in the South Orchy. A dao. A breech birth by the river bend. They arrived without being summoned, as though they could smell it, the moment life began to tilt toward death. A girl named Elise gave birth to twins under their care. She swore the sisters never touched her, only sat around her bed in a perfect triangle, humming in harmony until the air grew too bright to see. One of the children never cried, the other never stopped smiling. For 6 weeks. It was then that the town council met in secret beneath the chapel floorboards. 6 members, 4 men, 2 widows. They brought lists of names, families struck by strange births, mothers who had vanished, infants whose eyes didn't match the colour of their kin. Every list ended the same way. One surname, Carroway. The preacher, who once defended them, now refused to speak their name aloud. God turns his face, he muttered. The council agreed on a plan. 1 man for each sister to thank them in person. Only 2 men came back. The man who didn't return was named Joel Minton, a tanner, broad-shouldered, with a temper known to split doors in half. He wasn't afraid of the sisters, that's why they chose him. He went up the ridge at dusk, carrying a satchel of elderflower and a bundle of lamb's wool, the peace offering they agreed upon. Neighbours saw him at the Carroway gate, one hand resting on the latch, the other tightening on his satchel. The sky was bruised purple, the air oddly still. He stepped inside. He was never seen again. 2 days later, his satchel turned up beside the creek, untouched. The elderflower still tied in neat bundles, the lamb's wool dry as bone. His boots were found on the Carroway porch, perfectly upright, and perfectly dry, despite the rain. That winter, births across the parish nearly stopped, not from illness, not from hunger, but from fear. Couples kept to separate rooms, fields went untilled, as if the soil itself might give birth to something unwanted. When a child did come into the world, people kept their distance. Some babies seemed wrong, features that shifted with the seasons, eyes that seemed too knowing for their age. The Carroway house grew quieter. No chimney smoke, no voices, but no one believed they were gone. Some swore they'd moved beneath the earth, sleeping under beds lined with the black feathers of swans. Others whispered that they were waiting for a name that would finish what they'd started. Then one night a stranger arrived, alone, horse trailing dust from 3 counties over. In his coat pocket a wax-sealed letter, in his hand a cross carved from burnt yew. He stopped at the crest of the ridge. The horse refused to move forward. He dismounted, walked the rest of the way alone. The next morning the sun rose red as fresh blood. No one ever saw the man again. No one ever found the cross. In early 1844 the drought beads. Egan. It came creeping from the south, slow and dry enough to crack bark and bleach bones where they lay. Wells emptied overnight. Frogs vanished. Even the rain seemed to lose its name. But on the ridge, the Carroway garden bloomed. It grew thick and overfed, humming with insects no one could name. Pale roots burst through the fence posts. Blossoms the colour of deep bruises clung to twisted stems. Fruit dripped to syrup that stained the stones black. One schoolboy, drawn by the smell of something both sweet and rotting, wandered too close. He came back with his palms blistered raw, and a shard of tooth lodged in his ankle. They breathed, he whispered to his mother. The vines. They breathed, and they knew I was there. The doctor called it sun fever, but that night his mother woke to find their front door nailed shut from the outside, and their curtains knotted into shapes that spelled her son's name. She left the parish the next morning. She came without warning. A midwife from Clark Hollow, 2 towns over, wearing a yellow bonnet and carrying a copper basin tied with hemp cord. She walked straight into Dogwood Parish, asking for the Carroway Sisters by name. No one had spoken those names aloud in months, not since the ridge had gone silent. She claimed she'd been summoned by letter, invited to assist with a difficult birth, but no one in town had sent it. No such letter could be found. The council told her to go back. The preacher told her to pray instead. She ignored them all and set off for the ridge, walking as though she knew exactly where she was going. 2 days passed. On the 3rd morning, the preacher's hound limped back to the chapel steps, foaming at the mouth, its fur marked with red welts in the shape of fingers. In the creek bed below the ridge they found the copper basin, warped and blackened as though something had burned it from the inside out. The midwife herself never returned. But that night, there was singing from the ridge. 3 voices. The familiar harmony the town feared, joined by a 4th, thinner, higher, and not quite human. From that day on, Mebeth Carroway was the one most often seen. Always the youngest, always the one who kept a step behind her sisters. But now she came into town alone, under heavy fog, apron stained with something between rust and wine. She stopped in front of the post office one morning and stared at the flagpole until the sun was fully up. The shopkeeper tried to greet her. She only said one word, "Measure," then turned and walked away. That same day, 3 men working in the schoolhouse found carved symbols beneath the floorboards, concentric circles around a crude eye, repeated over and over, identical in size and depth. The teacher swore she'd never seen them before. She left before the week was out, without collecting the pay. Her replacement lasted less than a month. Said the blackboard chalk began to write names on its own, names of children not yet born, or never born at all. From the edge of the trees, Mebeth watched. It was Eunice who appeared next, barefoot in the blacksmith's yard one fog-heavy morning. She asked for nails, not horseshoe nails, not coffin tacks, a very specific number. 41. When the blacksmith asked why, she said, "1 for every breath he wasn't supposed to take." He gave them to her. That night, he woke screaming, clawing at his chest, swearing something was hammering inside his ribs. He died 3 days later. No wound, no reason. When they prepared his body, they found the 41 nails arranged beneath his pillow, in the shape of a cradle. The physician called it grief. The reverend called it judgment. But those who'd heard the way Eunice asked for them knew better. She hadn't come for help. She'd come to return what was owed. It happened on the edge of Wethersfield, in a sagging farmhouse where no one had dared to knock since the father's funeral. The girl's name was Maynard Pearl, quiet, pale, the kind of girl who spoke little even before grief hollowed her out. After her father's burial, she had simply wandered into the woods, toward the ridge, toward the Carroways. No one followed. Months later, she returned barefoot and dazed, a swaddled infant in her arms. Its skin was the kind of pale that looked like it had never felt the sun. Its hair was so fine it didn't stir in the wind. When asked the child's name, Maynard only said, "He already has one." The neighbours tried to welcome her back, but something was wrong. The baby wouldn't cry, wouldn't nurse, it only watched. Within a week, the Pearl household went quiet, no smoke from the chimney, curtains drawn, doors never opening. A neighbour girl, curious enough to press her face to the window, swore she saw the infant sitting upright at the kitchen table, staring at the family as they prayed. By the end of the month, the house was empty. No one saw Maynard leave. No one saw her carry the child away. The following season, Hester Carroway returned, but not on foot. She came by fire. Witnesses from the far side of the parish swore they saw the glow at the crown of the ridge just after midnight, a steady, unnatural orange that didn't flicker like a blaze, but pulsed as though it breathed. By morning, the air stank of scorched copper and wet ash. The ridge looked the same. The house still leaned to the left, the garden still bloomed, but the dirt on the slope had gone black and soft, as if it had been turned from underneath. That week, the council finally broke their silence. They sent a rider to fetch help from the county seat, a man who didn't know the stories. They gave him careful instructions, a letter, and a warning, no, to stay past sundown. He didn't listen. He reached the ridge before dusk, dismounted, and walked the last stretch alone. When night fell, he hadn't returned. The next day, his horse wandered back into town, reins neatly coiled and looped over the saddle horn as though placed there by careful hands. And in the saddlebag, the letter they'd sent with him, still sealed. After that, the ridge stopped pretending it was part of the parish. A wall of silence settled over it. Birds didn't fly above it. Dogs wouldn't bark toward it. And in the dark hours before dawn, the sound of humming could be heard, faint but constant, carrying across the fields like a song learned before you were born. It began with the doors. One by one, houses across Dogwood Parish woke to find their front doors nailed shut from the outside, always in the dead of night, always with nails hammered in perfectly straight, as though placed by someone who'd had all the time in the world. At first it was just the outer doors, then the shutters, then the cellar doors. One man, a miller, found his bedroom door nailed from the inside while he and his wife still slept in it. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the snow. When the nails were pulled out, they smelled faintly of milk and ash. Those houses shared one thing. Every occupant had either given birth under the Carroways' hands or lost a child since their arrival. Then came the marks. A crude eye carved into the lintel above the door, the grain of the wood darkened as though scorched from within. Some had a circle around it, others had two. No one knew what the variations meant, only that they were never erased. Paint wouldn't cover them, sanding only made them reappear deeper than before. One widow tried to chisel hers out. By the next morning the mark had returned and her newborn grandson was gone from his crib. 3 days later, she found him sitting in the middle of the road at dawn, dry and silent, staring toward the ridge. When she picked him up, she swore she felt something shift under his skin, like the slow turn of an eel in dark water. By now, the men of the council stopped meeting. The preacher stopped preaching. No one dared summon help again. They knew now this was not a matter for sheriffs or soldiers. It was Hester Carroway who began appearing in the fields at night, standing perfectly still among the scarecrows. Farmers swore they saw her watching the houses marked with the eye, never moving, her black skirts swaying though there was no wind. And then the voices began. Children waking in the night. Git, standing in the corners of their rooms, speaking in unbroken streams of sound. Not words, not even a language anyone could place, but a tone, a rhythm, like something being recited. Parents shook them awake. The children never remembered, but the words stayed in the air, echoing after their mouths had gone still. One father nailed his own shutters shut from the inside. He told his neighbours it wasn't to keep something out, it was to keep something in. If you've made it this far, I need you to do something for me right now. In the comments, type this phrase twice. The veil is thin. Once you write it, you'll remember it. And once you remember it, you'll start to see what the rest of this story is really about. The family left at dawn. A man named Corwin, his wife, and their 2 daughters, the youngest only 6 months old. Their house had been marked with the eye weeks earlier. They'd kept their windows shut, their fire cold, their mouths closed to the neighbours. But after the baby woke 3 nights in a row, laughing in the dark at something in the corner, Corwin decided they would not see another sunrise in Dogwood Parish. They packed no furniture, only food, clothes, and the wagon. He salted the doorway before locking it. His wife carried the baby wrapped in 3 blankets, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The ridge was behind them before the sun had fully risen, but the further they got, the heavier the air seemed to grow. By noon, the horse began to falter. Sweat streamed down its flanks, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold. Then it stopped entirely, legs trembling, refusing to pull forward. Corwin unhitched it, told his wife to wait, and walked ahead on foot. He swore he could see the turnpike in the distance, the road to Clark Hollow. But with every step, it didn't get closer. Instead, the fields began to look wrong. The hedgerows thickened, curling into shapes that bent toward the road. The trees leaned in. The sunlight thinned until it looked more like smoke than light. That was when the baby began to cry. For the first time since she'd been born. Corwin's wife tried to soothe her, but the sound didn't stop. It deepened, too low for an infant's throat, until it was almost a hum. The trees began to sway though there was no wind, and from between the trunks 3 figures emerged, black-cloaked, barefoot, the Carroway Sisters. Corwin turned to run back to the wagon, but it wasn't there. Neither was the horse, neither was the road. Behind him stretched only the same narrow path curving back toward the ridge. The sisters didn't speak. They did. Nant need to. Ha reached out her arms, and the crying stopped instantly. The baby turned her head toward the sound, eyes wide, and reached back. Corwin's wife, God help her, let go. When they returned to the parish at dusk, the family walked barefoot, clothes untouched by the dirt. The baby was gone. And when Corwin was asked what happened, he only said, "We didn't leave, we just thought we did." That winter, people stopped trying to escape. The ridge didn't need walls or fences, it needed only time. The preacher had grown gaunt by then, his voice little more than a rasp. He hadn't spoken the Carroway name in nearly a year, but on the first frost of 1845, he woke before dawn, dressed in his oldest cassock, and began walking toward the ridge. No one saw him leave, but word spread quickly. By the time the sun climbed over the fields, people were watching from their porches, holding their breath, following his figure as it moved along the path. He carried no Bible, only a small brass bell. When he reached the leaning house, the door was already open. The sisters were waiting, standing in the shadow of the threshold, Eunice in the centre, Ha to her right, Mebeth to her left. The preacher did not step inside. "I've buried too many," he said, "and I've baptized too few." No answer, only the sound of the wind dragging along the ridge, slow and deliberate, as if it wanted to hear every word. He lifted the bell and rang it once. The sound didn't carry like it should have. It fell short, muffled, as though the air itself was swallowing it whole. "What are you bringing into this town?" he demanded. It was Mebeth who stepped forward, eyes pale and unblinking. "Not bringing," she said. "Catching." The preacher frowned. "Catching what?" "Breath," she said. Then Ha spoke, her voice lower, heavier, "the ones that come before the cry." The preacher shook his head. "That's not life. That's not God's work." Eunice smiled faintly. "God does not own every gate." He tried to speak again, but something shifted in the air, a vibration, deep and low, like the groan of earth before it cracks. From somewhere behind them came the sound of breathing, slow, wet, not one breath, but many, overlapping, too many to belong to any single body. The preacher stepped back. His foot landed on something soft. He looked down. The ground was littered with swaddling cloths, stiff with aguish. Some fresh, some discoloured with what could have been blood or something older. The sisters watched him without moving. "I won't let you," he whispered. Ha tilted her head. "You've already let us." And then the breath behind them became a wail. Not the cry of an infant, but the drawn-out sound of something that had been waiting too long to be born. The house seemed to lean further toward him, as though it wanted him inside. The preacher dropped the bell. It didn't ring when it hit the ground. By nightfall, he was back in town. He didn't speak of what he saw. He didn't preach again. But every morning after, the parish awoke to find fresh swaddling cloths hanging from the branches of the elder tree behind the chapel, dripping slowly into the soil. The final births began without warning. They didn't happen in homes anymore, not in beds, not with family standing by. They happened on the ridge. Those marked by the eye would wake in the middle of the night and simply walk there. No one stopped them, no one dared. By the time the neighbours realised they were gone, they were already climbing the slope barefoot, eyes half closed, carrying nothing but their own bodies into the dark. Some were heavy with child. Others weren't, or at least hadn't been when they went to bed. From the fields below, you could see the glow of lanterns moving through the Carroway garden, winding like fireflies in a jar. And above them, the house leaning forward as though listening closely to what was about to happen. The sisters worked in silence. No herbs, no cloth, no boiling water. Only their hands, pale, thin, certain. The births came quickly, too quickly, each one ending the same way. A single long breath, but no cry. And then the humming would begin. 3 voices, braided together, rising and falling like the tide. The air itself seemed to move with it. Those who claimed to have watched from the tree line swore the lantern light bent with the sound, curling inward until it wrapped the mother and child in a perfect sphere of shadow. When the mothers came back down the ridge, they were different, not sick, not weak, just emptied in some way that didn't show in their bodies but did in their eyes. None of them would speak about what they'd given birth to. But sometimes, a few nights later, their windows would be found open, curtains billowing, cradle empty. By late autumn, the ridge was alive at night. Shapes moved through the Carroway garden, not just the sisters, but smaller forms, hunched and quick, carrying bundles toward the house, bundles that shifted and twitched as though trying to escape. No one went to stop it. Naaman, drunk and desperate, tried. He made it halfway up before the air thickened around him like water. He later told his brother he saw dozens of faces in the dark, not fully formed, just impressions, mouths pressed against the glass of something invisible, breathing as though they'd been waiting to be let out. When he woke the next morning, his hair was streaked with white. He could no longer speak above a whisper. By the first frost, the humming from the ridge was constant, day and night. And on the morning of the winter solstice, the sound stopped. For the first time in years, the ridge was silent. No smoke from the chimney, no movement in the garden, no footprints in the snow. It was as though the Carroway sisters had finished something. The silence lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, the people of Dogwood Parish woke to the sound of the church bell. Not a slow toll for the dead, a frantic, uneven ringing like someone was pulling the rope with both hands. They gathered in the square, faces pale, watching the steeple sway slightly with each pull. No one was inside the chapel. The rope moved on its own. Then the sound came, not the humming, not the wailing, but breathing. Slow, in unison, the sound of 100 lungs filling at once. Every head turned toward the ridge. The Carroway house stood straighter than it ever had, no longer leaning, no longer sagging, as though something inside it had been holding it down all those years and was finally gone. The sisters were outside, standing in a line at the garden's edge, facing the town. Behind them, dozens of figures stood perfectly still, not children, not exactly. Their proportions were wrong. Too long in the limbs, too narrow in the skull, as if they'd been pulled from the memory of a human body rather than the thing itself. Their skin was pale and damp, their eyes wide and fixed on nothing. Each one held something swaddled in cloth. The sisters didn't speak. They only turned, leading the line of figures down the ridge toward the square. The closer they came, the colder the air grew. Breath hung in front of every mouth, even the mouths of those swaddled shapes. When they reached the edge of town, Eunice stopped. She looked at the crowd and smiled for the first time anyone could remember. "These," she said, her voice carrying unnaturally far, "are yours." They placed the swaddled shapes on the ground, one by one, in the snow. Then they turned and began walking back toward the ridge without another word. The long-limbed figures followed, vanishing into the tree line. No one in the parish moved at first. Then, slowly, someone knelt and peeled back the first cloth. Inside was not a child. It was something still breathing, its skin translucent and slick, its tiny hands curling and uncurling in the cold air. Its eyes opened, and every person watching felt the exact same sensation, a memory they didn't own, pressing itself into their mind. The shapes began to shift, their bones cracking softly, as though deciding what they would become. By nightfall, every one of them was gone. The snow bore no footprints, the ridge was empty. The Carroway Sisters were never seen again. But in the winters that followed, Dogwood Parish learned a new sound. It came on the longest nights, carried low through the bare trees, the sound of 100 breaths, perfectly in sync, just beyond the edge of the fields. Waiting.